An apple core, empty of seeds, full of secrets. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Your words always make this community stronger. Let's begin. When I tell you it started with an apple, don't picture Eve and the snake. Picture something smaller, less biblical, and a lot more inconvenient. A half-eaten apple left on the edge of Wolfe's desk, balanced there like a dare. I noticed it the second I walked into the office that morning, coffee in one hand and the mail in the other. Wolfe doesn't eat apples. He eats pears, peaches, cherries in season, but not apples. Peels too thick, texture too uneven. I knew that, like I knew the size of his beer glass, which meant the thing was an intruder sitting where it had no right to be. "Archie," Wolfe said without lifting his head from the Gazette, "remove that insult." I set the mail down, picked up the apple, and held it. Want to know the curious part? Someone ate it down to the core and forgot to leave the seeds. Neat little hollow, like someone scooped them out. That got him. He lowered the paper, pinched his lips, and gave the apple a long, suspicious stare as if it had committed high treason. "Bah, a prank. Dispose of it." I was halfway to the wastebasket when the bell rang. 11:30 a.m., too early for clients, too late for delivery boys. I headed for the door, apple still in hand, and opened up to a woman who looked like she'd walked out of one of those department store ads for spring coats. Pale blue wool, buttoned tight, and eyes that told you she wasn't out for a stroll. She was wound up, scared, but she had a spine under the nerves. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. I said, "The door says Goodwin, Archie." Wolfe's name is on the other side of the building, etched in marble, lit up at night. You can't miss it. But since you're here, come in. She stepped in like someone expecting the floor to collapse under her. In her gloved hand, she carried a small brown paper bag. She clutched it like it held her life savings, or maybe the fuse to a bomb. When she saw the apple in my hand, she gasped. Just a little, but enough. Wolfe's eyes, from his chair, narrowed. "You've brought us an apple core," he said. Not a question. The lady sat down without waiting for me to invite her. "Yes, that's mine," I dropped into my own chair. "Lady, you've got a peculiar way of introducing yourself." Her lips pressed together, then she pulled the bag open and set it on Wolfe's desk. Inside were 3 more apple cores, each hollowed out where the seeds should have been. "I don't know what it means," she said, "but they've been left for me. In my office, in my car, even on my doorstep. I don't know who else to turn to." Wolfe puffed, adjusted in his chair, and finally gave her his full attention. "Madam, before I decide whether to endure this intrusion, I will require your name." "Marian Kesler," she said. I work at Bergland and Fay, the import house. Apples are not my business, but someone is making them mine." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, a sign he was considering whether to tell me to escort her out. He opened them again, fixed her with his usual basilisk gaze, and said, "Explain. From the beginning, and do not omit anything you suppose trivial." "The trivial is the marrow." She swallowed, nodded, and began. And just like that, I knew the apple wasn't going in the wastebasket after all. She started with the office and worked outward, which I appreciated. Some people begin with their childhood and a tooth that never came in straight. Marian Kesler kept to the last 3 weeks. She's an operations manager at Bergland and Fay, which means if a crate sneezes in Antwerp, she hears about the cold before it clears customs in New York. On a Monday, she said, she'd refused to adjust an entry on a consignment marked Apple Base. Food flavor, Lot 7A, warehouse slip attached. The declared weight was light by a tidy 5%, the sort of error that grows legs if no one steps on its tail. She stepped, The next morning there was a hollowed apple core on her blotter, wrapped in a napkin like it had manners. "You told no one?" Wolfe asked. "Only the person who asked for the adjustment," she said. "Mr. Amres Bergland." "Harlan," I put in. "The name rings the bell of money." "The founder," she confirmed. "He said it was to correct an overseas invoicing difference." I said it didn't add up. He told me to be pragmatic. I said we could be accurate first and pragmatic later. She hesitated, as if expecting a police whistle. That afternoon, Ms. Fay called me into her office. "Tessa?" I said. "Yes." She smiles with her lips, not her eyes. She said we were in a competitive quarter and that I was being inflexible. I asked for documentation. She said it would materialize. It didn't. 2 days later, a second apple core was on the passenger seat of my car. "Neatly hollowed," I said. "Like the first." No note. But when I got home that night, there was one on my doorstep. "I live in a doorman building." She pressed gloved fingers together. He said no one came up. It must have been left when I was out. I didn't sleep much. Wolfe made a low, dissatisfied noise. "Who else knew you had resisted this larcenous arithmetic?" "Leo Ventnor would have heard. He's head of security. He has keys to everything. He and we went out twice, months ago." It ended quickly. "Why?" I asked. "Because he talks like a policeman who hasn't decided who's guilty yet, but would like to." It makes dinner grim. I could feel Wolfe watching me enjoy that line and hating himself for it. He lifted his hand. "Names. All who had motive to resent your probity." She took a breath, opened the bag, and stared at the brown crescents as if they might offer a list. "Mr. Bergland, Miss Fay Leo, our customs broker, Gideon Pike. He's useful, and that's all I'll say. And Dr. Emery Vale, a consultant chemist who analyzes essences for us. He and I disagreed about a certificate 6 weeks ago. He recommended passing a shipment that, well, the numbers looked odd, like they'd been walked to fit the form." "Do you import apples?" Wolfe asked. "Not usually. We import concentrates, fruit bases, citrus oils, spices, vanilla. Apple base is cheap, but it's used. The lot in question came attached to a larger shipment of mixed aromatics. It wasn't itemized until it hit the warehouse. That's another reason I flagged it Pa." He slid his thumb along the rim of his chair's arm. "Concentrates. You brought none for me to smell. I brought the only proof I have," she said softly and nudged the bag. "And whoever left that one on your desk is telling me they know where I am, even when I don't tell anyone." I set the apple I'd been holding beside the bag. Close up, the cavity was neat, too neat for indifference. It wasn't gnawed, it was carved. A small instrument had been used to scoop out the seed pockets. If you wanted to stash something in there the size of a shirt button, you could have done it. Then you could have eaten down and walked away with an empty safe. "Archie," Wolfe said, "the office was locked last night when you left." "And when I came in this morning," I said. I unlocked it. Fritz was in the kitchen by 8, Theodore in the plant rooms by 9, and I got here a hair before 10. That apple wasn't here yesterday. He eyed the cores as if they had proposed marriage. Someone with a key or skill has made a point in my house. I dislike points made in my house. "Miss Kesler, you have money." It wasn't a question. People who keep their dignity under strain wear it like a tailored coat. "I have savings," she said. "How much of them do you require?" $2,000 as a retainer," he said, "and your candor. You will answer every question, whether or not it embarrasses you or your employers. You will withhold nothing. If you hesitate with a dismal misconception of loyalty, I shall end our association." She didn't flinch at the number. She did at the last sentence. "I am loyal to what is right, Mr. Wolfe. I came here because someone is trying to frighten me into being otherwise. I'll say this for Wolfe. Affront works on him like coffee on mortals." He flicked a glance at me. "You will take Miss Kesler to Bergland and Fay after lunch," he said. "You will be introduced as a consultant for a private client. You will speak to Mr. Bergland and Miss Fay, and you will observe. If Gideon Pike is present, you will sample his odor for the tang of impudence. If Mr. Ventnor displays his police residue, you will scrape it. As for Dr. Vale, learn what he thinks Applebase is for, since Applebase has become a kind of hieroglyph here." "Right," I said. "I'll also count their cause." "Do. And take the bag with you," he added, "but leave the one that insulted my desk. I wish to consider it." She started to rise, then sat as the bell rang again. I went for it. When I opened the door, a man about my height with a jaw that cut corners stood in the hall. He wore a suit that wanted to be a uniform and eyes that said it would rather be a search warrant. "Leo Ventnor," he said, as if the name should badge me. "Miss?" Kesler left without telling anyone where she was going. We like to keep track of our people. I turned my head so he could see her in the office. "Then your hobby is paying off. You found her." He took a step like he thought the threshold paid a toll. I kept my shoulder in it. "You can tell me your business, Leo," I said, "and if I think it needs the attention of the court of last resort in the next room, I'll see about a hearing." He looked past me at Wolfe the way men look past a safe at the man who owns the combination. "We've had some security concerns at the firm," he said. "I don't want our private matters aired here." "Yet here you are," I said. "Airing away." "Archie," Wolfe called, without raising his voice, "let the man in." He has been invited by his own pretensions. Ventnor came in and took the room with his eyes. He saw the bag on the desk, saw what was in it, and for the first time his jaw lost shape. "What is this stunt?" "No stunt," Marian said, and if there had been tremor before, it was gone. They were left for me. One of them was in my car. "Miss." "Kesler imagines enemies," he told Wolfe. "Our quarter is rough." "We've had a few pilferages. That's my department." "She's high-strung," Wolfe sniffed. "If you are responsible for the keys and the comings and goings," he said, "you are responsible for the trespasses too. Do you deny that an object was placed on my desk this morning that I did not place and that my man did not? I abominate the necessity, but it will be convenient if you tell me you arranged that." Ventnor's eyes narrowed. "I've never been in your house." "Then someone else has been," Wolfe said, "and has done so to tell Miss Kesler that she is watched. So you have a failure, Mr. Ventnor, either of vigilance if you are innocent, or of subtlety if you are not." Ventnor's hands opened and closed. He wasn't used to finding himself on the wrong side of the glass. "I came to escort Miss Kesler back to the office. Mr. Bergland wants to see her." "She will return after lunch," Wolfe said. "My man will accompany her." "That's not necessary," Ventnor said. "It is indispensable," Wolfe said, and there was iron under the velvet now. "I have accepted Miss Kesler as a client. Any further interference with her movements will be communicated to Mr. Kramer at the district attorney's office, and if I must endure it, even to Sergeant Rowcliffe, who will mishandle it with his customary verve." Ventnor considered whether to argue with the furniture. He settled for me. "You're Goodwin. You have a reputation only on odd days," I said. "Today is even. See yourself out." He looked at Marian. She didn't look back. He went, taking his uniform that wasn't with him. When the door had clicked, Wolfe exhaled, a long gust like a man who had tasted something bitter and found a use for it. "We dine at 1, he said. "Afterward, you will go and be pragmatic, Archie, in your inimitable way. Miss Kesler, you will remain until then. You will telephone your office and say you have engaged counsel. If anyone asks which, you will say Nero Wolfe. If that provokes, all the better. Provocation is a liver when wisely applied." She nodded. She didn't ask why telling them would help. She'd already understood the simple arithmetic. If someone wanted her frightened, They had miscalculated by leaving a footprint on the wrong carpet. Wolfe reached for his beer. I gathered the bag, thinking about seeds that weren't where they should be and people who were. Lunch ended the way Wolfe likes it, with him having more cream sauce than conversation, and Marian Kesler eating as if Fritz's veal could prop up her nerves better than prayer. I kept the talk light, nothing heavier than baseball scores and the weather, which gave her time to breathe and Wolfe time to brood. By the time we were back in the office and I had my hat ready, Wolfe leaned back, dabbed his lips, and gave his verdict. "You will go, Archie. Miss Kesler will accompany you, but you will not allow her to be left alone with any of the 5 she named. If they wish to vent spleen, you will receive it. Your ears are more durable and decorative," I said. "Shall I bring back a bushel of apples while I'm at it?" He flicked a hand. "Bring back comprehension." That is harder. Marian and I took a cab down to Bergland and Fay's building on Varick, a block of concrete trying to look respectable with brass doors. Ventnor was waiting in the lobby, pretending he hadn't been. He fell in step without asking. If he expected me to salute, he was disappointed. We rode the elevator together in the kind of silence that comes with people each rehearsing a line they don't intend to use. The offices were polished, but smelled faintly of cold storage, fruit essences, spices, and whatever else they imported to bottle and resell. Marian led me to Bergland's door, mahogany with frosted glass that made shadows inside. She knocked once and went in. Harlan Bergland was the kind of man you could mistake for a banker until you saw the rough edges. Hands too broad, shoulders that had done lifting before they did delegating. He had white hair and a deep groove between the brows, like he spent most days considering which rival to strangle politely. Behind him, the pie, window-framed warehouses and the river, as if he kept his merchandise in sight even from above. "Miss Kesler," he said, half relief, half reprimand. "You disappear at midday and bring a consultant?" His eyes landed on me, and his tone left the question open like a trap. "Archie Goodwin," I said. "I don't consult, I observe." Mr. Wolfe sent me that landed like a card face-up. Bergland shifted in his chair. His eyes narrowed. "Wolfe. That name means costs." "Why?" "Because someone has a taste for apples," Marian said. Her voice didn't shake. She set the bag on his desk and opened it. The hollowed cores stared up like empty sockets. "They've been left for me." This morning, one was left in Mr. Wolfe's office. That makes it his business as well as mine. Bergland leaned forward, took one between his fingers, and turned it. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "Ridiculous." "Then explain it," she pressed. "If you know." He set the apple back as though it might smear him. "Office politics. A prank. We're in a competitive trade. Rivals send messages." "Rivals don't have keys to my car," she said, "or to Mr. Wolfe's office." The door opened before Bergland could answer. Tessa Fay entered, draped in a black dress that said she liked power neat. She saw the apple cores and smiled faintly. "Still chasing seeds, Marian?" "You knew about them?" Marian asked. "They've been discussed," Fay said smoothly. "Some of us think you're dramatizing. Others think you're making a point, staking out your virtue for the world to admire. Neither is profitable." Her eyes moved to me. "And this must be Mr. Goodwin. You're handsomer than I expected." "That's my curse," I said. "Men distrust me, women overestimate me, and I can't walk into a room without someone pointing it out." She didn't blink, which meant she was used to fencing. "If Wolfe has taken this up, we'll all be summoned, won't we?" "He loves his parlor plays occasionally," I said. "First he likes to smell the scenery." Bergland snapped, "Enough. Tessa, if this nonsense continues, we'll have trouble from auditors. Miss Kesler, you've done your part, but you've also overstepped. We don't need detectives here. We need pragmatism." It was a word Marian had heard before, and it showed. She stiffened, then turned to me. "You've heard what you need?" I nodded, but not too much. "Some. Not all. I'll want to see your warehouse logs and the customs slips. Also a word with Mr. Pike and Dr. Vale Bergland rose. "You'll get nothing without a warrant." "That can be arranged," I said easily. "But you'd prefer Wolfe ask than Kramer." "Kramer doesn't enjoy veal." That slowed him. He sat again, grinding a fingertip into the blotter. Fay folded her arms and leaned against the desk. Ventnor had been silent, but he shifted closer like he wanted to underline Bergland's authority with muscle. "You'll have 15 minutes with Pike," Bergland said grudgingly. "Vale is off-site today." "Then Pike will have to earn his keep," I said. A clerk fetched Pike, and he turned out to be narrow, with thin hair slicked to one side and a smile that didn't settle anywhere. He looked at the bag, at me, and then at Marian, as if trying to decide whether to laugh or apologize. "Fruit cores," he said. "Is that the evidence?" My word. We deal in essences worth thousands per drum, and you're chasing apple scraps. Why not consult an orchard? "Because orchards don't hollow them with penknives," I said. He shrugged. "Then it's a joke. Offices sprout them like weeds. You put 20 people in rooms together, someone will carve fruit. And sneak it into cars, doorsteps, locked rooms," I said. "Do you moonlight as a locksmith, Pike?" He flinched at that, just enough for me to notice. Then the smile returned. "I prefer keys that open opportunities, Mr. Goodwin, you mistake me." "Maybe," I said, "but mistakes get corrected." "I'll ask again when Dr. Vale's around." Pike excused himself, leaving a trace of sweat for perfume. Fay was amused. Bergland was not. "Miss Kesler," he said tightly, "you're spreading anxiety. This firm runs on discretion. If you drag in detectives, clients will hear, and clients don't like scandals." "Neither does Wolfe," I said, "but he has a lower tolerance for seedless apples than you." I steered Marian out before Bergland's veins popped. In the corridor, she let out a long breath. "You saw them. How they looked at me. I don't know who's worse, Tessa with her smiles, or Leo with his fists. Or Pike with his sweat," I added. "Don't worry. Wolfe will sort it. He likes his apples tidy." When we left the building, the cab wasn't where I'd left it. Instead, on the sidewalk against the curb, sat a small paper sack, folded neatly. I bent, opened it, and looked inside. Another apple core, seeds gone, the hollow darker now, as if soaked in something. Marian gasped. Pedestrians flowed around us, uninterested. I folded the bag, tucked it under my arm, and flagged a cab. "Miss Kesler," I said, "congratulations." Someone's keeping up back at the brownstone. Wolfe would have one more reason to puff, and I one more reason to believe this wasn't just fruit and fright. Someone wanted her rattled, and now they wanted Wolfe invited in. Fritz met us in the hall with lips pressed thin enough to cut paper. That meant either a sauce had broken or something had scraped his sense of order. He doesn't break sauces. "In the kitchen," he said to me, in a tone he reserves for egg whites and intruders. "Now." I took Marian's coat and parked her in the office with Wolfe and the bag. Fritz ushered me past the cool pantry and over to his spice cabinet, a regiment on parade, glass jars labeled, in a hand that looked like it had graduated from a Swiss academy for penmanship. He pointed to a space between cumin and nutmeg. "Mace," he said. "It was not here when I left for the market at 11. When I returned at 12:15, it was here." He plucked down the squat jar and held it to my nose. "And this is not mace." It wasn't. Mace is delicate, lacy, makes nutmeg behave. The jar held something darker, ground fine with a faint, sweet caramel tang under the spice, like a carnival pretending to be a church picnic. I dipped a finger and touched. sticky. Fritz's eyebrows attempted flight. "Don't taste it," he snapped. "You have a tongue." "I need it for the rest of your life." I set the jar down. The threads in the lid were stained a light brown, as if whatever was in there had been poured and wiped with impatience. On instinct, I tipped the jar and gave it a light tap. A curled scrap of brown paper slid against the glass. Fritz sucked in air as if the jar had insulted his mother. I eased the lid and used a fork to fish the scrap out onto a saucer. It was the corner of a packing slip, torn. On it, in violet pencil, was written 7A. Fritz crossed himself in the church of routine. "I left the door locked," he said. "I always leave it locked." "You do," I agreed, and glanced at the kitchen windows. "Those are barred. The back door has a bolt that argues like a mule. The front door had been under my eyes until we left. Then the house had Wolfe and Theodore and no visitors. Fritz hadn't waved past. Could somebody have tucked it here this morning? No. He was positive enough to sell to a jury. "This is my cabinet. If a ghost touches it, I feel it." "Then it wasn't a ghost," I said, which was helpful as far as it went. I took the saucer and the jar and headed to the office. Wolfe had not bothered to keep his disgust discreet. The paper bag we'd brought from Varick was open on his desk, its new passenger sitting at the top like a headline. He had pressed the core to the back of his wrist with the delicacy of a jeweler testing gold, then put it down with a sound that said he hoped the apple supply of the world would fail immediately. "It has been rubbed with a carrier," he said. "Not water, not oil, an intermediate. The residue is slightly sweet. Propylene glycol would fit, but I will not hazard from a whiff." He eyed my cargo. "What have you there?" "Subtle trespass," I said, and set the mace that wasn't in the saucer on the desk blotter. Fritz's spice cabinet was rearranged while he was out. Inside the jar, not mace, but a sweet, sticky something and a torn corner with 7A in violet pencil. "Would you like to abominate that too?" He did not reach for the fork. He leaned, inhaled, and made a face. Caramel color, perhaps, and, amateur aromatizing. Someone wants us to associate the kitchen with their commerce. He tapped the scrap with a fingernail. "And someone wants us to read." Law 7, a Marian, who had been sitting very straight in the red leather chair, let her hands unclasp. "That's the lot number on the apple base," she said. "The one I refused to adjust." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Whence this vulgar theatrics? Someone has entered my house again to tell you that what is theirs is everywhere." He raised his eyes to me. "That is impertinent and imprudent." Before I could endorse that, the phone rang. I took it. "Nero Wolfe's stable," I said. "We exercise logic here twice daily." A woman's voice answered, smooth as poured coffee. "Mr. Goodwin? Tessa Fay, put Mr. Wolfe on, please. He's visible," I said, "but currently busy admiring apple cores." "I can take a message?" "No, you may not," she said, and softened it half a shade. "Tell him I am calling as a courtesy. Miss Kesler is on administrative leave." Effective at once, Marian's head turned as if someone had called her name from the bottom of a well. I gave her a hand up with my eyes and said, "That's brisk." "For what?" "For creating disruption," Fay said. "For bringing in outside help. For stirring anxiety. Choose a noun. Mr. Bergland prefers plural." "Thanks," I said. "We'll embroider it." I covered the mouthpiece. "Tessa Fay." Marian's suspended Wolfe's lips pressed together until they were a white line. He extended a hand. I gave him the receiver. "Miss Fay," he said, and his voice was cordial enough to curdle milk. "Your promptitude argues fear. I congratulate you on recognizing the sensation. It may instruct you." Her smooth tone turned a degree cooler. I could hear it even at my angle. "This is a private company matter. We won't be bullied in our own house, Mr. Wolfe." "Yet you thought to bully in mine," he said. "Do not mistake me. You have relieved me of the necessity to dance." You have made the next step imperative. Good day." He hung up without allowing her the last word. He looked at Marian. "You will not return there again without my leave. You will telephone Dr. Emery Vale and ask him to attend you here at 8 this evening. Tell him you wish to consult him privately about irregularities and that his name has been mentioned to Mr. Wolfe. Mr. Goodwin will be present." She swallowed. "He may refuse." "He may," Wolfe said. "Then we shall consider his reasons. Meanwhile, Archie, call Mr. Panzer. We require his nose, and his patient, Saul Panzer, doesn't make entrances. He materializes when you've half decided he's already there." I made the call anyway. He listened to my synopsis, asked 2 questions that would have made a priest blush for their simplicity, and said he'd stop by within the hour for the lay of the sidewalks on Varick and Miss Kesler's building on 72nd. While I was still at the phone, the other line burred, the house line to the plant rooms. Theodore's voice came up tight. "Mr. Wolfe? Someone has been in the cool room." Wolfe took it from my hand and was gone from his chair faster than I've seen him move for anything short of a rare orchid in distress. Marian stood, but I waved her down, and followed Wolfe and Bulk through the hall to the steel and glass doors. Theodore met us with his jaw clenched. "I set the humidifier at 62, he said, pointing. "It is at 58, and the Lysimachia section. One pot has been turned so the label faces away." I did not do that. Wolfe's eyes ran over the benches like a general checking troop lines. He didn't touch a thing. "Nothing cut? Nothing bruised?" "No," Theodore said. "Only moved." Mocked Wolfe's nostrils flared. He stood very still amid the green, misted air, and then he nodded once and went back to the office. When he was in his chair again, he was composed. The only sign was the way he laid his hands flat on the armrests, as if expecting them to steady the furniture instead of the other way around. "Very well," he said. "We will respond in kind. The visible will be faced with the visible." He indicated the bag, the jar, the saucer. "Archie, take these to Dr. Vollmer. Ask him, as a personal favor to me, to identify the carrier in the apple, the adulterant in Fritz's jar, and any traces on that slip. If he cannot, he will refer you. Leave the originals with him. Fetch copies if possible. Then go to Miss Kesler's building. Speak to the doorman. Learn who has been watchful there these last 3 weeks. Then to Varick?" I said. "No, not yet. Mr. Panzer will observe Varick. You will escort Miss Kesler home and wait to see whether Mr. Ventnor's hobby brings him to her steps. If he appears, you will note whom he calls afterward." He closed his eyes briefly. "At 8, Doctor. Vale." "And if Vale declines?" I asked. "Then he will be here at 9, Wolfe said, "with a policeman." Marian stood. Some of the tremor had left her spine. "If I've brought danger into your house, you have brought insult," Wolfe said. "Danger may follow, but insult is intolerable. Be grateful I'm more glutton than saint. Saints forgive. I do not." That was as close as Wolfe gets to reassurance. I pocketed the saucer and the bag in a way that would make Dr. Vollmer glare at me for contaminating his evidence, told Fritz I'd bring his cabinet back to its proper religion, and headed for the door with Marian on my arm. The brownstone had been nudged. That made it his case in blood. Outside, the afternoon had turned the color of steeped tea. If anyone was counting apples, we were about to adjust the ledger. Dr. Vollmer doesn't waste words on pleasantries if you show up with a paper sack that smells like a grocer's mistake. He took the core with tweezers as if it might sue him, peered, sniffed, and made the kind of face he reserves for amateurs who treat chemistry like a parlor trick. He dabbed a swab along the hollow, tapped a reagent bottle, and watched the cotton bloom the soft pink you get when propylene glycol says good afternoon. "Carrier," he said. "Not water, not oil. Common in flavor work. There's something else." He lifted the swab again, sniffed and nodded. Ethyl maltol, I'd bet. Caramel chocolate note, and a short chain ester, apple as advertised. So our vandal rubs his messages with the stuff they sell, I said. Or with what they don't want you to know they sell, he said. He poked at the scrap from the spice jar. Copying pencil, violet indigo, old-fashioned. Docs use them because they show through damp. I'll run these and call Wolfe after supper with more than a sniff and a hunch. He didn't ask why I had carried a fake of Fritz's mace into his clean little kingdom. He just labeled, sealed, and told me to avoid getting anything else sticky on anything he liked. I thanked him like a penitent and headed uptown to 72nd. The doorman at Marian's building had the gravel of a man who learned English one newspaper at a time and liked it. His badge said HOBART. His eyes said he had watched a lot of people pretend to be no trouble. Miss Kesler's expecting you, he told me, and let his gaze do a small patrol up and down my person that would have made a tailor proud. I gave him Wolfe's card, friendly as a church usher. You see a lot, I said. See any apples? He didn't crack. Only the kind that tip. 3 weeks, I said. A core on her doorstep. Who brought it? He considered whether honesty was part of the rent. Then he tipped his head toward the ledger. We log trades. Messengers, plumbers, the man who says he's here to sell salvation. 3 Fridays ago, a boy in a brown jacket leaves a sack at 5:40. Says for Kesler. No name, no apartment. I was on break. Mr. Rizzi was on. He's sick now. I called him to ask. He remembers the boy was neat and didn't smell like trouble. A day later, a man in a grey hat asked if Miss Kesler lived here. Wouldn't give a name. Grey hat have a jaw that could chew glass? I asked. He nodded. And a way of standing like he owns the floor and is deciding whether to sell it. I told him Miss Kesler wasn't seeing visitors. He said he knew her employer, Leo Ventnor, I said. He didn't argue. Marian was upstairs pacing like she had worn a groove the length of the living room. The place was spare and clean, 2 good chairs and a bookcase that did more for her than jewelry would. I told her Volmer's first pass and the doorman's memory. That took 8 minutes. In the 9th, the phone rang and she picked it up like it might bite. It didn't. She listened, said thank you, and looked at me. Dr. Vale will come at 8, she said. He sounded cautious. Not surprised. Good, I said. Surprised men explain. Cautious men conceal. I told her I'd take the front parlor chair with a view of the street while she pretended to read. At 6:15, a man in a grey hat crossed the lobby and paused just long enough to admire the mailboxes. Hobart looked at me through the glass and lifted a finger the size of a sausage. Ventnor kept walking, went to the corner, and used the payphone there. I strolled out as if I'd forgotten the brand of milk we preferred, took the opposite corner, and studied the architecture. Leo talked with his back to the street and his hat pulled low. Twice he tilted his head to keep the receiver snug. He looked like a man trying to press a confession out of a telephone. When he hung up, he didn't head back to Varick. He headed west, and my curiosity leashed me for half a block before I tugged it back. Wolfe had assigned me to Marian, not to Leo's fitness regimen. At 7, Saul called. You want the postcards, he said in his Sunday school voice, which means he has them. Varick was calm until 5. At 5:15, Pike left by the freight elevator with a wrapped parcel, small. He walked it to a walk-up on Charlton and didn't ring. He used a key. 10 minutes later, he left without the parcel. The Charlton apartment belongs to a shell that pays rent with money orders. Window was open. I got a nose. Sweet, confectionery. The kind of sweet that wants to cover something apple, I said. Or a cousin. Also, Saul went on, a man who matched your doctor. Vale's directory photo entered Bergland and Fay at 4:30 with a slim case and left at 6:05. He didn't use the public exit. He used the side door and took a cab that didn't like being noticed. I could hear Wolfe's eyebrows raise from 30 blocks away and didn't need the phone to know his mouth had tightened. 8 o'clock at the house, I said. We'll have chairs. I returned to Marian and the chair with the view. At 7:45, the grey hat showed again, this time idle on the far curb, a man with enough time to waste and not enough to admit it. He watched the door as if waiting for a weather change. I watched him watching. After 5 minutes of that exciting theatre, he moved on, possibly to glare at some other piece of sidewalk. We went down at 7:50. Hobart saluted us with his eyelids. On the ride back, Marian said nothing and I didn't crowd it. Sometimes, if you add words to a strain, you get a tangled knot. At the brownstone, the stoop was clean. Fritz had probably scrubbed the granite after the earlier insult, and he would have enjoyed it like a duel. I opened the door, let Marian in, and followed her to the office. Wolfe had drawn the lines on the field. The desk had the bag, labelled now in Volmer's hand. The counterfeit mace jar sat in a tray like a defendant out on bail. The torn scrap with its violet 7A had been slipped into a sleeve. Wolfe was in his chair with his forefinger laid across the arm as if measuring the house's pulse. Fritz brought beer and coffee and the best lemon cookies to come out of flour and virtue. Marian didn't touch them, which might have been the greatest testimony of alarm I had seen all day. At 3 minutes to 8, the bell rang. I took it. The man on the stoop had a face you'd trust with your laundry and not with your secrets. Narrow, careful, barbered mustache, a coat sleeve that smelled faintly of antiseptic, and a case that wanted you to believe it was harmless. Dr. Emery Vale inclined his head as if the air might bruise. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you asked for the chemist." "We did," I said. "Come in before the apples go bad." In the office, his eyes flicked to the bag first, then to Wolfe, then to Marian, then back to the bag, like a compass trying to decide whether north was money or trouble. He set his case down and didn't sit until Wolfe indicated the red chair with his eyelids. "Dr. Vale," Wolfe said, "we are concerned with apple base, lot 7A, with duplicity and weights and invoices, with messages insinuated by fruit, and with the intrusion of those messages into my house. You were summoned because Miss Kesler named you among those with opinions about certificates." "I prefer the opinions now to the certificates," he gestured at the bag. "And I prefer candor to circumbendibus. You will find that a strenuous evasion here is more exhausting than an admission." Vale smiled, the thin kind that's married to caution. "Then I will try to avoid athletics," he said. "What do you want to know?" "Why the seeds are gone," I said, because somebody needed to say it. His smile faded by a shade. For a fraction, he was looking at the apples the way a man looks at his handwriting on a note he didn't intend anyone else to read. He glanced at the jar, at the scrap with 7A, and then at Marian, measuring the room the way a chemist measures a pH. "That," he said, "depends on whether you want the chemistry or the motive first." "Both," Wolfe said. "But begin with the one that makes you more uncomfortable." Vale watched the cores like they might begin to talk without him. He set 2 fingertips on his case and tapped once, deciding, "Chemistry first," he said, and the careful tone made it plain that motive was the itch under his collar. Apple seeds contain amygdalin. If you crush them or heat them wrong, you get a faint, bitter almond trace. Benzaldehyde. It clutters simple spot tests and confuses dull noses. If someone wanted to leave you an apple that read clean in a quick check, no stray bitter, he'd scoop the seeds. The cavities are convenient besides. You can hide a paper flake or a pellet there, rub the core with a carrier so scent clings, and the message travels without a bottle. Wolfe nodded once. "Propylene glycol," he said. Vale's eyes flicked, surprised that he didn't have to teach that part. "Yes. PG, ethyl maltol, cotton caramel, and a light apple top note." Whoever handled those cores did it at a bench, Not a kitchen, I said. And the fake mace? He looked at the squat jar with distaste. Not mace. A syrup cut with PG and sweetened with a confectioner's profile. There's a warmer tale hiding in there, something like coumarin or one of its cousins. If you wanted to cheapen a natural flavor base for the candy trade or to mask an off note in a fruit blend, you'd use something like that. Not legal for food under that label. Coumarin, Wolfe repeated, rolling it in his mouth as if considering whether it paired with beer. Outlawed for table indulgence, tolerated for perfumes, smuggled into flavor houses by the venal to counterfeit vanilla and falsify fruit. Pa Vale didn't meet Marian's eyes. I consult for Bergland and Fay, he went on. I test lots. I certify what they are and aren't. 6 weeks ago, I saw paperwork for a blended apple base, Lot 7A, that didn't smell like apples at all. It smelled like an accountant's appetite. I told Miss Fay it could be sold to perfumers, but not to confectioners. She said the end customer was export perfumery grade. I signed the analysis for perfumery use only. 2 weeks later, a client from Jersey sent back a drum they said was flat and wanted more boost. The paperwork called it apple base, food grade. I asked why my caveat had been ignored. I was told it hadn't been. I was told I had misunderstood. I was told in 3 different tenses that I was making work. Marian's voice was steady, but low. And when I flagged 7A for weight and invoicing, "You became inconvenient," Vale said, and there was no triumph in it. Someone is blending cheap syrup with coumarin profile into apple base and stealing a margin on the weight while selling it to buyers who think they're getting natural. The cause? He lifted a hand and let it fall. Our theatre. Cruel theatre. Seeds removed to say, we've taken the heart of it, and we can always reach yours. And to keep a lab from finding the wrong ghost first. Wolfe moved only his eyes. Names. Vale took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief he'd taken care to make look clean. Gideon Pike is clever and careless at the same time. He knows back doors and he likes side money. He would arrange a tank in a side apartment for cutting and rebottling, and he would think himself brilliant. Miss Fay has a palate and a head for numbers. She will do what a quarter demands and dress it as strategy. Mr. Bergland has built things, and men who build things believe they own the rules. He might not know details. He will smell margin and trust his lieutenants. Ventnor will keep keys and tell himself he keeps order. I certify. I do not sign invoices or open drums I'm not asked to open. Pa, Wolfe said again, but more softly. You certified a fraud for a use you pretended to believe. I certified a chemical reality and wrote a restriction, Vale answered, some old stiffness surfacing. Then I discovered later that restrictions become elastic when the buyer is hungry and the seller is pressed. Elastic, I said, like ethics when there's a quarterly call. He looked at me without warmth. You asked me for truth, not posture. That is the truth I had. If you want the other one, the one that ties a neat bow around a villain and sends him to the chair, you may have to wait for your policeman. The phone rang as if it had been cued to save him. I took it. Vollmer's voice had a dry smile. I can make your day mildly more honest, Goodwin. PG, yes. Ethyl maltol, yes. Also coumarin in a whisper and a trace of vanillin. The slip has dock dust, coal and cordage, and the violet is copying pencil. No prints worth fussing about, but 2 fibers. Grey wool with a machine oil note, and a black silk thread you can pretend matters if you wanted to. What you have is a flavor house that wants to be a perfume house after hours. I relayed it. Vale didn't blink. Marian sat straighter. I could hear the jolt in her lungs. Wolfe's lids lowered a fraction, the way they do when the board on which we're playing gets its markers arranged to his liking. Very well, he said. Dr. Vale, you will call Miss Fay from this room. You will tell her that Mr. Wolfe has asked you for a list of lots you have caveated for perfumery use in the past 6 months, and that out of professional prudence you are complying. You will say that we shall compare that list against invoices marked for food grade. Then you will be silent and listen to what she chooses to betray. Vale drew breath. She will fire me. She will threaten to, Wolfe said. Threat is heat. It softens and it reveals grain. He gestured to the phone. Now. Vale dialed with a surgeon's care. Fay's voice came through cool and tinted. He delivered his line. There was a pause long enough to count to 4. Then her voice thinned, flatter, like a sheet pulled tighter. Emery, she said, be sensible. Lists are how enemies build cases. Mr. Bergland does not appreciate cowardice dressed as prudence. You are a consultant, not a confessor. If you imagine that aligning yourself with Wolfe will make you pure, consider how it will look when clients learn you think our products are unfit. You'll never certify in this city again. Do you understand me? Vale looked at Wolfe. Wolfe wiggled 2 fingers. More. Vale added, he also has a sample. Another silence. Shorter. A sample of what? The 7A blend. The line hissed like a pan on flame cooling. Fay said, smooth again, but with a pulse under it. Then Mr. Wolfe should come to the office in the morning, and we will all be civilized together. Mr. Wolfe does not attend recitations in other people's halls, Wolfe said, inclined toward the mouthpiece. You will come here when I demand. Yet for a heartbeat she said nothing, and for that heartbeat we all heard the click of a decision in a woman who did not enjoy being told where to stand. Then demand, she said, and prepare to be disappointed. She hung up. Vale replaced the receiver like a man setting down an instrument that had cut him somewhere he hadn't expected. Wolfe said, she is rattled. Good. Mr. Goodwin, you will telephone Mr. Bergland and tell him that at 10 tomorrow he, Miss Fay, Mr. Pike, Mr. Ventnor, and Dr. Vale will attend here for a discussion of seedless apples and seedier practices. Use those words. He will scowl and agree. Mr. Panzer will be in the corridor to preserve our guests from the temptation to leave early. Marian looked at me. And tonight? Tonight, Wolfe said, you will sleep in my guest room with the door locked, and Mr. Goodwin will keep watch on the stoop for a quarter of an hour to see whether Mr. Ventnor's hat has the habit of passing by when it thinks no one is looking. He steepled his fingers. There is a manner, Miss Kesler, in which one tells intruders they have ceased to amuse. Tomorrow I shall use it. Tonight we deny them the pleasure of our fear. It wasn't a sermon and it wasn't sweet, but it did something civics never does. I called Bergland. He grunted, snarled, tried to make it 11 and settled on 10. I rang Saul and told him to bring his calm. Then I took my hat for the stoop and, because I have learned my employer's economy, a small flashlight. If a gray hat drifted by, I intended to know whether it had a head under it or only a shadow. The stoop does its best work after 9 when the block goes from errands to opinions. I took the top step, hat down, flashlight in my pocket, and let the street settle around me. Across the way, a couple argued about soup. A taxi harpooned the curb and missed by a yard. The air had that faint, sweet note New York gets when bakeries close and trucks don't. 10 minutes in, a gray hat eased past the far tree and paused like it had a date with the sidewalk. Evening, Mr. Goodwin, Ventnor said, without making it sound like a greeting. Evening, Mr. Ventnor, I said, making it sound exactly like one. You left your shadow here earlier, and I've been feeding it. He stayed across the rail, hands easy, jaw set. Is she in there? You'll have to be more specific, I said. We run a popular house. There's always a she in there. Right now there are 2 and a man who counts as 3. His eyes slid toward the door and came back. You're making trouble that doesn't belong to you. Lucky for me, trouble travels, I said. Some of it by apple. That put a crease by his mouth he didn't want. He shifted, and when he shifted, a little draft crossed the stoop that had a ghost of machine oil under it. Vollmer had mentioned grey wool with a machine oil note. If Ventnor owned a scent, it was the kind you picked up, leaning on unclean hinges. "Tell Miss Kesler she's made a mistake," he said. "Tell Wolfe he's made a worse one." "I never relay threats for free," I said. "They get to ride on my dime, they tip." His gaze cut once more to the door, took a picture he meant to file, and then he moved on, not fast, not slow. He made the corner and took the payphone like a man checking whether the wire still works after he's used it to garrote someone. I gave him half a block and a quarter of my curiosity. Then I put both back in my pocket and stayed where Wolfe had planted me. A bicycle courier came up the street at 10:07, the kind whose calves look like they've been carved by wind and rationing. He coasted to the bottom step, peered at his clipboard, and said, "Delivery for Mr." Goodwin I signed because saying no would only make the evening longer. The envelope was plain manila, no return, no stamp. Handed to the courier somewhere not far. It had weight like a polite invitation and smelled faintly of candy left in a glove compartment. I slit it with a thumbnail. Inside was a small glassine packet and a violet-typed strip that said simply 7A. The packet held 3 apple seeds, lacquered to a shine that made them look like beads. I didn't have to put them under my nose to know the sweet was there, a little PG halo. Someone had decided to upgrade from theater to props. I took the envelope inside. Fritz was in the hall, arms folded like a barricade with opinions. I told him our theme for the night was seed counts, and he told me, dryly, that if anyone touched his cabinet again, he would salt and smoke them. In the office, Wolfe let the envelope rest on the blotter, frowned at it as if the grammar offended him, and flicked the corner of the glassine with a fingernail. "Counting," he said. "They are inviting us to count. 3 seeds, 3 trespasses, my kitchen, my plants, my desk, or 3 principles." His lips twisted. "It is not a cipher, it is a sneer. You will give them to Dr. Vollmer in the morning." "Ventnor swung by," I said. "Scented like brass hinges. Use the pay phone." "Of course he did," Wolfe said. "He's a man who mystifies himself with his own caution. Any result? Only that the phone still accepts nickels." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Good. We will not be stampeded. Are the locks set?" "They are," I said, "and Hobart at Miss Kesler's building will turn away any stranger who arrives with fruit." He grunted, which was approval with a bandage on. I went back to the stoop for a last scan. At 11:30, the phone rang inside, and I heard Fritz trot, which means it wasn't a stranger. He brought it to me at the door. Saul's voice came in the level tone he uses for fires and toddlers. "Your boy Pike," he said, "visited Charlton again at 10. Carried in a tin I'd call 5 gallons if I were ungenerous. Left without it. Window open. I took the air. There's a table with a bench rig and a hot plate, 3 drums with snap lids, 1 small pump, a scale that's seen both flour and sin, and a bottle of something labeled EM. I'll pretend it's ethyl maltol until I'm told to be more romantic. No one else entered after he left. I'll bed down across the street with a view. If you find an apple tree in the fire escape, water it," I said. 10 a.m. Brownstone. "Bring your unhurried self, always," Saul said, and hung up like a man closing a drawer he intends to open again. I gave the stoop another 15 minutes. Ventnor didn't recur. If anyone wanted a midnight run at our locks, they decided to spare their wrists. At midnight, I locked up, glanced in on Marian asleep in the guest room with a lamp on and a face that could rest now that someone else was doing the worrying, and went to the office. Wolfe had a book open and his eyes closed. The book was a history of adulterations in the spice trade that would have put most men out in 3 pages. He uses it like a lullaby for his blood pressure. "Anything?" I asked. "Only the expected," he said, not opening his eyes. They will come at 10, they will declare, they will equivocate, and they will lie. Our task is to give them a path by which lying is costlier than confession. Breadcrumbs, I said, only with less bread. And fewer crumbs, he said. Go to bed, Archie. Morning at the Brownstone is a holy office, and Fritz presided. Coffee arrived with a sermon about doors and habits. Theodore reported the cool room at 62 and his labels facing front. No one had trespassed overnight. The house had taken back its shape. At 8:30, Volmer called with an addendum. The lacquer on the seats was a cheap shellac, the type a man uses to make cardboard look like mahogany. The violet on the strip was our old friend copying pencil. He'd bagged the lot and would hold them until Wolfe decided to invite a policeman to admire his work. By 9, Wolfe began his liturgy of chairs. The red leather chair for the client, Marian. The chair by the Globe for Bergland. The sofa end for Miss Fay, Pike in the lower place where his knees would complain. Ventnor in the corner near the door, so Saul could block him by simply remembering he had shoulders. Vale in the middle where his caution couldn't hide. Wolfe made these decisions with a finger, a glance, and an old general's memory for where pressure turns to admission. Do not let Fritz serve apples, he told me, and if that was a joke, he did not share the smile. And Archie, no interruptions. If Mr. Kramer calls, tell him he will be invited after the ceremony. Kramer already knows there's a ceremony, I said. He called last night to ask me whether I'd taken up pippins as a hobby. I told him to put on his Sunday best pa, Wolfe said, but it lacked venom. He was ready. Marian came down in a dark suit that made her look less like a target and more like a witness. She sat in the client chair and folded her hands once and never again. At 9:50, Saul's knock tapped the door, and his calm came in with him. He posted in the hall with the air of a man waiting for a bus that always stops where he stands. At 10 sharp, the bell rang, punctual as fear. I went to get it. Bergland and Miss Fay stood together like a coin struck with two faces. Ventnor half a step back, jaw set to factory settings. Pike trailed. Slick hair, narrow smile. They smelled like money that had been in a warm room. I ushered them through and into the chairs Wolfe had chosen, and if any of them noticed how the furniture was thinking for them, they didn't say so. Vale arrived a minute later, on time to his own discomfort, and took his place with a sigh you could write small notes on. Wolfe didn't rise. He looked them over like a gardener considering a blight, put the tips of his fingers together, and let the room meet his silence. The bag sat on the desk. The fake mace jar sat like a witness waiting to be sworn. The violet 7 gleamed under its sleeve. I shut the door, set my back to it, and waited for the moment the air gets its first crack. It came when Wolfe said, in a voice as polite as a summons, "We will begin with the seeds." We began with the seeds because Wolfe said so, and when he says so, rooms obey. He nudged the glassine toward the edge of the desk with one finger as if it might try to crawl back. Bergland watched it the way a man watches a fly at a board meeting, annoyed, not yet alarmed. Miss Fay watched Wolfe. Pike watched the door. Ventnor watched me and decided not to try his luck with Saul in the hall. Vale watched his hands. 3 lacquered seeds, Wolfe said, velvet with grit. Delivered last night by courier. A strip marked in copying pencil. Violet. The lacquer is cheap shellac. The seeds smell of propylene glycol and ethyl maltol. Festive for a funeral. You have all had notice that your impudence has trespassed too far. Now we will identify the author of the trespass and the keeper of the ledger that made it profitable. Fay smiled politely. Mr. Wolfe, you are charming when you try to frighten. I don't try, he said. I conserve. He turned his head a fraction. Dr. Vale has already explained why one removes seeds. because their amygdalin confounds crude noses, and why one rubs a core with a carrier, because scent travels. Whoever devised the theatre understands both. That absolves Mr. Ventnor, who understands locks and telephones, not carriers. Ventnor shifted. I understand people who break rules. You enforce rules, Wolfe said. You break them when asked. He didn't wait for Ventnor to answer. Mr. Pike, last night you visited a walk-up on Charlton Street, carrying a 5-gallon tin. There is a bench, a pump, snap-lid drums, and a bottle labeled EM. The window is convenient for airing sins. Do you wish to be coy? Pike's smile took 5 seconds to assemble and didn't quite stick. I don't know any Charlton Street, mister. Wolfe. I go home after work. Men who lie to me must at least be original, Wolfe said. Mr. Panzer? Saul didn't come in. He didn't need to. His voice, level as pavement, carried from the hall. Apartment 3 front, 214 Charlton. Pike used a key at 10:07, departed at 10:22 without the tin. This morning at 7, a messenger took a wrapped parcel from the same address to a warehouse on Commerce leased to an LLC that pays with money orders. Bergland turned on Pike. Gideon. Pike didn't look at him. He looked at Fay. Fay didn't look back, which told me more than his denial had. We're wandering, Fay said lightly. Even if Mr. Pike had a hobby, and I'm not saying he does, what have seeds to do with it? The theatre, Wolfe said, and his mouth curved as if the word tasted stale. You decided on apples because an apple base was the vehicle for your theft. Lot 7A, weight trimmed by 5% for profit, a confectioner's profile cut with coumarin to improve the illusion, and invoices made elastic to pass it as food grade when convenient. It is childish, Miss Fay, when one's conspiracy is a fruit, to scatter its cores about. She kept her eyes on Wolfe and her voice cool. Those are large words, mister. Wolfe. Theft. Conspiracy. Perhaps you'd prefer market pressures and creative sourcing. Perhaps I'd prefer beef to speak Latin, Wolfe said. I rarely get what I prefer. He picked up the squat jar Fritz had surrendered and tapped its lid. You put this on my shelf. You turned a label in my plant rooms. You left your rubbish on my desk. He let his eyes go to Ventnor without turning his head. Mr. Ventnor, the fibers on the torn slip are grey wool, touched with machine oil. You smell like door hinges. You are at my stoop. If you maintain you have not entered this house, I shall accept that, but I will not accept you as innocent. I will accept you as a servitor. Ventnor's jaw flattened. I don't take orders from Miss Fay. No, Wolfe agreed. You take them from Mr. Bergland and Mr. Bergland delegates, as men who prefer their fingers clean, till he finally turned to Bergland. Sir, you have run a house, but you have allowed 2 guests to run a racket in your pantry. One, Miss Fay, adds the margin and rationalizes it. One, Mr. Pike, manages the plumbing and hides the vessels. Dr. Vale, who is squeamish but not heroic, writes caveats in the hope they'll be read. Mr. Ventnor, who calls himself a keeper, keeps keys for others, and Miss Kesler, who declined to be pragmatic, receives apple corpses on her desk, in her car, on her doorstep, and finally on mine. Bergland pounded an open palm on his blotter knee. That's fantasy, he spat. We do not cheat customers. You do, Wolfe said, polite again. When you are told it is export, perfumery grade, you nod and sign. When the quarter is rough, you don't ask whether a drum walked from perfumery to candy. You let Miss Fay's smile take care of it. He aimed a small tilt of the head at Vale. Dr. Vale warned you by restricting a certificate. You ignored him. Vale cleared his throat. I wrote, for perfumery use only, on 7A and others. The invoices I later saw did not match my language. Fay's smile thinned. You saw nothing official. You saw rumors of paperwork, Emery, and you prefer to be dramatic when you are uncomfortable. She angled toward Wolfe. If you believe we are foolish enough to send jokes to Miss Kesler and trespass on your kitchen, then you also believe in ghosts. Ventnor doesn't pick locks on West 35th to deliver fruit. He has better hobbies, such as payphones, I put in. And standing under our tree. She didn't grant me a glance. If there is a lab on Charlton, then a competitor set it up to frame us. "Pah," Wolfe said. "Competitors do not use our doc's copying pencils and your broker's boy. Competitors do not call Miss Kesler high-strung in Mr. Ventnor's wording, and competitors do not place a disguised syrup in Fritz's mace jar and drop a scrap marked 7A in Violet." He let the last word sit. "You made a mistake there, Miss Fay. Violet is useful in damp places. It is unnecessary for civilized offices. But it clings to fingers and cuffs." She shifted one wrist half an inch. "And if you want to know how much that is, ask a man who dances for a living." I saw the faintest bloom along the edge of a silk cuff, something like a bruise a pencil might leave if you wrote without a blotter. I didn't point. I've learned that Wolfe likes his own drum roll. "Let us be efficient," he said. "Miss Kesler, please tell Mr. Bergland when you were informed you were on administrative leave." Marian's voice was steady. "Yesterday, at 12:33, Miss Fay called the brownstone. Bergland turned, really turned, and for the first time I saw his throat work as if he'd swallowed something that fought back. Tessa, before we had a meeting?" We protect the firm," Fay said crisp. She involved Wolfe. That forced our hand. "It forced your hand," Wolfe said, without heat. "Because Miss Kesler would not falsify weight, because she might connect a doc's pencil, a bench on Charlton, and a consultant's caveat. Because she could not be pragmatic in your sense. So you chose to frighten her. You sent tokens. When she did not fold, you added insolence and came to my house by proxy." He drew a breath, slow. "I cannot endure insolence in my house." Pike wet his lips. "This is talk. You have no evidence?" Wolfe's eyelids dropped, rose. "We have enough to invite a policeman, Mr. Pike. We have Mr. Panzer's observations of your nocturnal deliveries. Dr. Vollmer's analyses. Dr. Vale's caveats. Miss Kesler's logs. A jar you placed in my kitchen with an adulterant you prefer, and fibers that caress Mr. Ventnor's suit." "That could be anyone's suit," Ventnor snapped. "The oil on it could be any hinges," Wolfe agreed. "You have the consolation of not being unique." Bergland leaned forward, palms flat. "Tessa, if you have used Gideon to—" She cut him with a look so clean it could shave. "If you're asking me in front of an audience whether I do my job, Harlan, then you have already decided you prefer scandal to responsibility." She turned back to Wolfe. "What do you want?" Wolfe's forefinger traced the grain of the desk once. "You will bring me, the police, in due course, your internal invoices and receiving weights on lots designated base for the last 6 months. The list of any drums diverted to or from the Commerce Street warehouse or the Charlton apartment, and the names of any buyers to whom you supplied food-grade product from lots, Doctor." Vale restricted. "You will do it before 5 o'clock today. Mr. Pike will surrender the keys he carries that are not yours, Mr. Bergland. Mr. Ventnor will put in writing the instructions he received regarding Miss Kesler's leave. You will all remain until Sergeant Kramer arrives, and you will speak when spoken to." "You said you would invite him after your ceremony," Fay said softly. "This is the ceremony," Wolfe said. "The benediction is Mr. Kramer's growl." The bell rang, punctual as the last line of a play. I didn't need to check the glass to know the scowl on the other side of it. I went anyway and opened up. Kramer pushed in with his hat under his arm and a weather system over his brow. He sniffed the room like it might be hiding garlic. His eyes found Wolfe, then the bag, then the jar, then the faces arranged like place cards at an unpleasant dinner. "All right," he said, already tired of us. "Who decided to turn my morning into a fruit salad?" Kramer planted himself in the middle of the rug like it had been laid to stop him and hooked a thumb at the desk. "I see props. Somebody narrate before I start scooping all of you." "Briefly," Wolfe said, which for him can mean anything. Miss Kesler refused to adjust the weight of Lot 7A, labeled apple base. She received token apple cores, seeds removed, rubbed with a carrier. The tokens escalated. Her car, her doorstep, my desk, my kitchen cabinet, my plant rooms. Mr. Panzer observed Mr. Pike visiting an illicit bench on Charlton Street where syrups are adulterated and rebottled. Dr. Vollmer identified propylene glycol, ethyl maltol, coumarin, and traces of vanillin on the tokens. Dr. Vale caveated 7A for perfumery use only. Invoices later reflected food grade. Mr. Ventnor hovers by payphones and doors. Miss Fay telephoned to place Miss Kesler on leave after Miss Kesler retained me. That is the marrow. Kramer looked from face to face like a bartender deciding where to stop the fight. "Anyone want to say no in a way that won't make me laugh?" Fay gave him the polite customer tone. "Sergeant, what you're hearing is a private business matter inflated by Mr. Wolfe's dislike of being toyed with. We don't adulterate food. If there is a hobbyist apartment, it isn't ours." "Private business," Kramer said, dead flat. "Lady, when it smells like coumarin and lies, it's mine." "Pike?" Pike cleared his throat and put on his small smile, the one that kept slipping. "I go home after work, Sergeant." "I don't carry tins to strangers." Saul's voice drifted from the hall again, as steady as a metronome. "Key in Pike's right trouser pocket. Ring of 3. He palmed it when you said, 'Sergeant.' Left sock has 2 more. Pike went crimson in a way that didn't flatter him. I crossed, quick and bent. "Don't make me peel you," I said, and he thought about the audience and chose to let his ankle be honest. 2 small keys slid out like embarrassed coins. Kramer didn't smile. His mouth twitched the way it does when he can smell time saving itself. "Goodwin, collect." "Ventnor, stand where I can count you without moving my head." "Bergland, if your name's on anything at Commerce or Charlton and you don't tell me in the next 60 seconds, I'll bring a spade." Bergland's jaw worked. For a second I thought we were going to hear his teeth crack. He looked at Fay, and whatever he saw in her face didn't improve his digestion. "There is a small storage unit on Commerce," he said slowly. "Short-term overflow." I assumed Mr. Pike managed it for legitimate reasons. "Assumed," Kramer said. "You boys and your assumptions." "Vale?" Vale polished his glasses to buy half a breath. "I restricted 7A and several others for perfumery use. If those drums were sent to confectioners, my restriction was ignored." "By whom?" Wolfe said mildly. "Will be resolved when we see who touched the paper." "Mr. Kramer, you will wish to send your men to Charlton and Commerce at once. The odor there will be instructive." Kramer's eyes went to me. "Keys." I handed him the ring. He jerked his head, and a plainclothesman I hadn't heard come in took them and went. Kramer looked at Ventnor. "Keys." Ventnor's jaw set to granite. "For what?" "For the next 5 minutes," Kramer said. "For everything." Ventnor produced a roll that could have opened half of Manhattan. Kramer parceled a few off to a second man and sent him 2. Then he hooked a chair with his foot, turned it, and sat on it backward, arms along the top rail, hat on the floor, the picture of a man not going anywhere until words turn into handcuffs. "All right," he said. "Wolfe, you think Fay's your brain and Pike's your hands." "I do," Wolfe said. "Mr. Bergland is the owner of the roof under which they decided rain is a kind of profit." Fay's smile pared thinner. "Sergeant, if you will permit me, we purchase bases certified as perfumery grade. We sell them as such. If a buyer mislabels, that is the buyer's fraud. And if Mr. Pike keeps a shabby apartment for whatever recreations. Recreations, Kramer repeated, unimpressed. We'll see what you're playing, lady. Wolfe let the next bit sit in the quiet, where remarks ferment. Miss Fay, he said at last, your cuff bears a faint violet smear. The bloom copying pencils leave when used without a blotter. The slip we found was written in such a pencil. The docs favor them because they endure damp. You do not need such an implement to sign memoranda in an office with Persian rugs. You touched that slip or its mates nearer the river. She glanced, involuntarily, at her sleeve. If she'd been less self-possessed, it would have been a flinch. Kramer saw it, and for Kramer, that's as good as a confession to mood. You were seen on the side door at 6:05 yesterday, Saul added from the hall as mild as weather. Slim case, taxi that didn't like being remembered. Vale's eyes cut to hers. For the first time, something unpracticed moved in Fay's face. Annoyance tinged with calculation. I checked paperwork, she said, too quickly for her own standard. Side door because the front was crowded. And my stoop? Wolfe inquired. Did you consult my planter box as well? That would be Ventnor, she said with the smoothness of a blade. Ventnor's head snapped toward her, put an extra crease in the air. You told me to keep tabs, he said. You said Miss Kesler was a risk. I said she was bringing in a risk. Fay returned, silk over wire. If you chose to posture in front of Mr. Wolfe's house, that was your... Kramer slapped the top of the chair once. Good. Keep pointing. It saves me chalk. Pike, where's your ledger? Pike swallowed. What ledger? The one that tells you which drums got rebottled and which buyers got lied to, I said. You don't run a side kitchen on your memory. He almost said, I do. He thought better and said nothing. His fingers worried the seam of his trousers. If he had a ledger, he had hidden it where men hide things when they believe in the permanency of cheap locks. The phone on Wolfe's desk rang. I got it. A voice I knew as one of Kramer's plainclothes, a fellow who sounded congenitally underwhelmed, said, Charlton's open. Bench, pump, 3 drums. One's marked 7A on the lid in pencil. The sink smells like a perfumery in a storm. No one here. We found a ledger under the stove wrapped in wax paper. Names, weights, initials GP on half the lines. We're going to Commerce, I relayed it. Pike's smile finally jumped ship. Fay didn't move at all. Her stillness had an argument in it. If she didn't flinch, perhaps the world would not either. Bergland's breath sounded like it had to wade. GP, Kramer said. Cute. He pointed at Pike. That gets you a ride, friend. Pike's eyes bounced to Fay. It wasn't subtle. We all did as we were told, he blurted. I don't sign shipments. I don't decide grade. I just... Open doors, I said. Cut syrup. Carry tins. Leave apples. He gaped. I didn't... He stopped and tried to reassemble. The apples weren't my idea. And the copying pencil? Wolfe murmured. Dock boys, Pike said, half a gasp. They use them? Yes, Wolfe said. They do. The second plainclothes called in from Commerce. Kramer listened to his own man, and the veins in his neck wrote a short essay on patience. Commerce has 6 drums, 4 with food-grade invoices and Vale's caveat numbers scissored off. 2 are stamped for export. Same sweet stink. A ledger card matches Charlton's. They're bagging it. Kramer stood, slow, like a man raising weight he enjoys. All right, he said. Pike, you come. Ventnor. I want a statement on Kesler's leave and every key you duplicated this month. Fay, you sit still until I decide whether you're riding now or after lunch. Bergland, call counsel who won't faint. He looked at Wolfe. You and your fruit. One day it'll be spinach and I'll retire. You won't, Wolfe said. You would miss my conversation. Kramer snorted. I'd miss Fritz's veal. He jerked his chin and one of his men stepped in from the hall to take Pike's elbow. Pike stood, then did the worst thing a man like him can do. He hesitated with his hand halfway to his inside pocket. Saul's shadow moved in the door, and the hesitation died of natural causes. "Leave it," Kramer said. Pike extracted a folded strip, the twin of our violet label. He looked around like a man deciding which god to disappoint. "I was supposed to leave this today," he said. "On Mr. Wolfe's stoop I took it. 10 a.m. tomorrow," it said in that damp-proof violet, a time after the time we were now having. They had scheduled their little theater to continue and had not expected the audience to arrive early. Wolfe's mouth did a small thing that, for him, is a smile. "Premature curtain," he said. Kramer put his hat back on as if to restrict the weather. "Everyone stays put until I say otherwise," he announced to the room at large. "Vale, don't go virtuous on me. You're a witness who reads fine print. Kesler, you don't talk to anyone from your firm without me in the room. Wolfe, if you have another jar that isn't what it says it is, keep it on your desk where I can scowl at it." He pointed at Fay. "And you, don't decide you can run this show on a telephone." "Sit." She sat. Not because Kramer told her to, but because for the first time since she had walked in, there wasn't a number she could add that made the sum come out comfortable. Wolfe steepled his fingers and closed his eyes as if to listen for a fly against a window pane. When he opened them, he let them settle on Fay, not unkindly. "You still have one arithmetic left," he said. "Whose idea the apples were, Miss Fay? And why seeds?" Her throat moved. She said nothing. "That," Wolfe said, "will be our next question." Fay didn't answer Wolfe's question about the seeds. She had the kind of silence that makes a room check its watch. Kramer let it go 5 beats and then scraped the chair with his boot, a sound like a file on a bar. "Lady, I don't need poetry." Whose cute idea were the apples? Pike tried on a shrug and found it didn't fit. "Not mine," Ventnor said. "Why would I?" And stopped, because even he could hear the answer. Because he liked keys. Vale's fingers worried his handkerchief once, then he folded it away. 6 weeks ago, he said carefully. "Miss. Fay and I discussed a drum that was going to a buyer who wanted boost. I said the lab boys would smell the bitter if they crushed the seeds. Miss Fay said—" He stared at the glassine like it might bite. She said, "Then keep the seeds out of it. Keep the bitter out of sight." I thought she meant procedures. Later I heard the joke about Miss Kesler's car seat. "No seeds there either," someone said. I didn't laugh. Fay cut him a look that could cauterize. "You infer generously, Emery." Wolfe took that and set it where he wanted it, which was in front of Kramer. Miss Fay has the wit for theater and the palate for deceit. She adopted "no seeds" as motif because it concealed a chemical nuisance and grated on Miss Kesler's honesty. Mr. Pike and his bench supplied the scent and carried the tokens. Mr. Ventnor supplied the surveillance and the keys. Mr. Bergland supplied the roof beneath which they all mistook commerce for absolution. Kramer grunted. "And my trespass on your kitchen." "Ventnor," Wolfe said, turning his head a fraction toward the corner. "A grey wool fibre with oil from a door hinge came away on the scrap in Fritz's jar. Mr. Ventnor smells of door hinges. Fritz's cabinet was disturbed when Fritz was out, and the front door was in the custody of my man. The tradesman's entrance was jimmied without leaving a scratch. That is a keeper's vanity. Ventnor showed his teeth without smiling. You want to pin every door in this city on me? Pin away." Kramer didn't ask permission. He rose, crossed, and with zero rhetoric ran 2 fingers under the lapel of Ventnor's jacket and brought up a thin sliver of brass with a serrated edge. One of those shims locksmiths use when they don't want gratitude. "What do we have here, Mr. Not My Door?" He pocketed it, unamused. "You can argue chain of custody with a judge if you like drama." The phone rang and I took it on reflex. Saul, unhurried as ever. "Small addendum," he said. Doc Clark at Pier 22 keeps a pencil under his ear that makes his ear purple. He remembers a nice lady in a black silk blouse who borrowed his pencil to sign a receiving note for a mixed aromatics palette last Thursday. She smudged her cuff. He remembers because she apologized to the cuff instead of to him. He'll swear to it. I sent him to get a sandwich and not to talk to anyone else but a man with a hat and bad language. I looked at Fay's sleeve and, without enjoying it, said, "Black silk, purple blush." Pier 22 remembers your manners. She adjusted the cuff and let her mouth have half a smile. "Sergeant, if Mr. Yes. Panzer's fishermen are nibbling. Perhaps you'll bring in their catch and we can see whether it's a minnow or a whale." "We're netting," Kramer said. He had his hat on his knee and his patience on a leash. "Pike's Ledger is a whale. Commerce is a whale. Charlton is a whale. You're a woman who is about to learn how cold the water is." "Sergeant," Bergland said hoarsely, "I didn't authorize any." "Save it," Kramer snapped, without cruelty. "You'll get a turn." He swung to Wolfe. "You've got your theater. Now give me your program, nice and ugly, so I can charge them and go smell lunch." Wolfe's eyes slid along the line of faces and came to rest where they always rest when he's bored with foolishness, on the truth. "Very well." Miss Fay's difficulty began when profit shrank. She located margin in the dark between perfumery and food. Apple base is cheap. Food buyers want natural labels. The palate wants a confectioner's profile. Dr. Vale's caveats were a nuisance. He is honest in the limited sense that he annotates reality when it passes his bench. Mr. Pike supplied a clandestine bench to cut drums with a PG coumarin vanillin blend. There was a bottle labeled EM, ethyl maltol, to sweeten the lie. Mr. Ventnor managed access, encouraged a doorman to forget, watched Miss Kesler's movements, and, when she would not be pragmatic, attempted to frighten her with a motif, apple cores without seeds, rubbed with the very carrier in which their fraud traveled, accompanied by notes in copying pencil as a private joke for those who handled damp papers at the dock. He lifted the glassine a quarter-inch and let it fall. When Miss Kesler retained me, Miss Fay acted to isolate her and to warn me. She telephoned to place Miss Kesler on leave, and she sent a core to my desk. That was presumptuous. She had Mr. Pike pour syrup into Fritz's jar and turn a plant label because she believes in art direction. She had Mr. Ventnor test my doors because she believes in her luck. They intended to escalate at 10 a.m. tomorrow, another token on my stoop, to show that their reach would persist and to win Mr. Bergland's approval by proving nerve. Mr. Bergland did not trouble himself. To see how his house had been turned, he delegated, and delegation curdled into conspiracy. Fay's eyes were on Wolfe like she was memorizing him for a day she planned to rewrite. "You can tell the story with better sentences," she said. "It doesn't make it true." "It will make it actionable," Wolfe said. "Mr. Kramer, you have the laboratory, the ledgers, the keys, the clerk, the fiber, the residue, and the motive." He leaned back. "You also have my house as an offended witness." "Your house testifies every time you look at it," Kramer said dryly. He turned to Fay. "Stand up." She didn't. She looked at Bergland, then at Ventnor, then at Pike, who had nothing left to lend her but sweat. You could see the sum in her head and how it came out wrong. When she did rise, it was smooth, not defiant. She was never going to give anyone that. "You won't prove I told him to open doors," she said, "or that I told a clerk to misstamp a drum." "I don't have to prove words you whispered," Kramer said. "I have your feet on the dock and your ink on the paper and your boy in the kitchen." Walk Ventnor took half a step as if to say something that would either be brave or stupid, and then thought better. Bergland slumped and then straightened as if he had remembered there was a spine in his back somewhere under the years. Vale sat with his hand on his case like a man who had just discovered the instrument can cut both ways. Marian didn't move. She didn't have to. She had already done the moving that mattered when she had come to our door. Fritz brought in a tray because Fritz believes in routines, and routines believe in him. He set it down, took one look at the arrangement of faces, and decided against offering anyone but Kramer coffee. Kramer drank, grimaced at its perfection as if excellence insulted him on principle, and set the cup down. "Pike," he said, "with me." 2 plainclothes flanked him, and he remembered not to reach for any more violet. "Ventnor, you plant yourself in a chair in homicide and write until your hand gets honest. If I find one more key after you swear you're done, I'll decorate you with them." He pointed at Bergland. "Counsel. And a pen that works." He jerked a thumb at Fay and didn't bother with a quip. "You're writing now." She moved past me. I caught a faint, stubborn trace of the same confectioner's profile we'd been chasing, like a ghost that didn't understand it had been called. On the threshold, she paused. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "For what it's worth, if Miss Kesler had been pragmatic, none of this would have been necessary." Wolfe lifted his lids a millimeter. "Madam," he said, almost courteous, "without people like Miss Kesler, the world would be nothing but necessity." He flicked his fingers to end the scene. "Misters Goodwin, see to the door." When the hall had swallowed them, a shuffle of shoes, Kramer's grind, Saul's soft tread like patience in leather, the office let out the breath it had been saving. Vale cleared his throat. Bergland rubbed his brow with 2 large fingers like he might rub the last week out if he pressed hard enough. Marian looked at the bag, then at Wolfe, then at me, and the knot in her shoulders eased by a notch you'd need calipers to measure, but you'd believe if you'd been watching. Wolfe reached for his beer, took a long draught, and set the glass down with care. "Seeds," he said to no one. "Removed, the fruit is tidier, but sterile." He closed his eyes. "There will be an aftermath. We shall endure it. Archie, call Mr. Vollmer and tell him to expect Mr. Kramer, and have Fritz remove that jar. I refuse to dine under a lie." Kramer's storm left the brownstone quieter than it had been in a week. The only sound was Fritz in the kitchen, corralling pots like a sergeant restoring order after a brawl. Bergland and Vale stayed behind, one because he had nowhere else to put his shame, the other because his conscience finally found a chair. Marian sat in the red leather seat with her hands clasped tight, not trembling now, but bracing, as though the floor might still shift. "You've won," she said finally, her voice low. "They'll be charged. But I'll be remembered as the one who let it happen. Whistleblowers don't get parades, Mr. Wolfe. They get notes in their mail, whispers in offices, doors that don't open anymore. You'll get a reputation," I told her. "Some reputations can't be bought. They have to be bled for. People forget gossips. They don't forget someone who stood her ground." Wolfe inclined his head a fraction, eyes half-lidded, which was as close as he gets to applause. "Miss Kesler, the world is not arranged to reward honesty. But honesty endures longer than guile, though guile struts noisier. You have endured?" Bergland gave a grunt like a man strangling an apology. "She saved us, Harlan," Vale said sharply. "You let Fay and Pike turn your house into a counterfeit shop. You'll answer for that, but don't you dare scowl at the woman who forced your eyes open." Wolfe cut in before Bergland could flare. "Enough. The district attorney will grind you all in his own mill. I'm not a moralist. I'm a gourmand. I resent deception when it enters my house without being invited. That is the only reason you sit here instead of in a gutter." Marian let out a long breath. "I owe you, both of you. Not just for the case. For listening when I thought no one would, I smiled. We're cheaper than therapy. Wolfe only charges a retainer, not hourly for his silences." That got her to laugh, a thin laugh, but real enough to turn the corner of her mouth upward. She stood. "Then I'll leave you to your peace. And to your dinner." After she left with Saul as escort, the brownstone sank back into itself. Wolfe leaned back, stretched his fingers against the chair's arms, and closed his eyes. "Archie," he murmured, "the matter is concluded. Miss Fay will write her memoirs behind bars. Mr. Pike will whimper. Mr. Ventnor will curse Locks for the rest of his life, and Mr. Bergland will sit in hearings imagining he had been betrayed, when he merely betrayed himself by sloth. Seeds removed, indeed. What is left without them is hollow. It cannot grow, philosophy before beer," I said. "That's a first." He reached for his glass, lifted it, and drank deep. "Beer nourishes," he said. "Philosophy clarifies. Dinner will redeem." That was the final word. I left him to Fritz's veal and Theodore's orchids, the house settling again into its fortress of order. Outside, the city had 100 new rumors to chew on, but the brownstone had its silence back, and Wolfe had his victory. For my part, I had the memory of Marian Kesler's laugh. Small, brittle, but the kind that meant she'd walk through the whispers, standing taller than the ones whispering. And that, for once, felt like enough. 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 Felt like enough.